story that will continue to unfold in the coming days. All right, so that was Kenya. Francis, you're going to carry on with the theme.
Yeah, Peter, today was meant to be a good day for democracy in Kenya. However, the rerun of elections, as you were discussing, turned violent. And let's get some analysis. Nixon Kathembo, East Africa analyst. And 3 deaths, tear gas. We saw Aldrin St. Pierre caught in the thick of it earlier. How did Kenya get to this?
Kenya get to this because of its historical nature of electoral politics, which is mostly ethnic in nature. Institutions of state and institutions of government are ethnically affiliated in one way or another, both on political side of the divide, be it in the opposition or even in the ruling party. So this is a byproduct.
Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, do they represent different ethnicities as well as different parties and political camps?
Exactly. Jubilee Party is formed mostly by Kikuyu and Kalenjin, and if you look at the historical nature of this politics, it comes a long way from the 1961 first negotiation for settlement of independence. You have to remember that Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who was the father of Raila Odinga, had to negotiate with the British to actually release Jomo Kenyatta, who is the father of Uhuru Kenyatta, and ask him, the British government, to wait until Kenyatta is liberated from prison so that Kenya can have independence. So the two, after getting independence, didn't get along because Kenyatta was then elected prime minister, then eventually president, and eventually they couldn't get along. They went different ways until that opposition has been happening up until now. But that is not only that. If you look at, to cut a long story short, if you look at the 2007 elections, it was along mainly ethnic line. But the interesting part is that the main protagonists in the 2007 elections, which were mostly Kalenjins, who were part on the side of Ruto, and Kikuyu, who were more on the side of Mwai Kibaki, the immediate former president, they have got together under Uhuru and William Ruto. And that shifts the dynamics of the electoral politics and how people vote along ethnic line as we see it today. And this has affected the politics in Kenya up until where we are today.
You're pointing to a very big divide. So we have a president incumbent likely to be re-elected. The opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has stepped out of this rerun. Is there any way that they could get together, the talk of the dialogue? Is there any chance Odinga could be invited into a cabinet of unity, or is that simply not going to happen?
It will depend on the political will. The question we need to ask whether there is a political will among the two protagonists to come to the table and decide on the fact of where are we going to take the country. Are we going to go along our hardline and the political grandstanding that we have seen currently? No. They have to think about where is the future of Kenya as a country, because those who are hurting are the common man on the street. And above all, these politicians get together, get to discuss, and later on they separate their ways. Whoever get affected is the person in the street, and who get incited is the person on the street. So it's time, I think, for the politicians, both on the political side of the divide, to think beyond their political interest and put the country first.
If they don't, how will this affect Uhuru Kenyatta's legitimacy as president? I guess the opposition will always be there saying we weren't part of the election, you're illegitimate.
Now, this is a very interesting. Kenya is bringing so many precedents in African electoral politics. One, this is the country where, for the first time, a presidential election is being annulled on the basis of electoral malpractice by the Supreme Court. Now, this is a country where the opposition, after winning, one would expect that they will go to the poll and galvanize their support to actually cement what they have been claiming to win. Now, you have an opposition fighting not for an election to take place, while the incumbent fighting for the election to take place, which is completely different if you look at the African electoral map and the African electoral politics. It's the incumbent who have been actually forcing the election to take place, while the opposition have been fighting to have a fair share of the electorate. So it gives a different dynamics altogether. However, there are two sets of questions. One is the political legitimacy of the elections. Are they politically illegitimate? The question is no, because there is no consensus among politicians. But the legal legitimacy is already there, because the Supreme Court of Kenya issued a directive that within 60 days the election should be held, and the Constitution of Kenya mandates the IEBC, which is the Independent Electoral Commission, to hold the elections. So on the question of legal legitimacy, the elections itself is legitimate. However, the illegality and issues that have been happening, such as the disruptions of the elections, one have to wonder how the courts are going to deal with this challenge.
And how will history judge the Supreme Court that said you had a poll, there were irregularities, the people in charge, instead of being removed or some other plan being made, the Electoral Commission is given 60 days to run a new poll? How can anything change in 60 days?
Well, that is a question now we need to ask. Politics versus law. And we need to understand that any legal processes emanate from the political processes. Now, we have to understand that while you're advocating for legal processes, law in itself cannot give a direction to how politicians happen. And this is where the challenge of the Supreme Court is. When this election ruling was given out, I said to some of my colleagues that this is a political ruling. If you look at how the institutions in Kenya are to be led or chosen, even the judges themselves, they are chosen on a basis of a political consensus. You have the opposition and the ruling party coming together and choosing who is going to be the judges, who is going to be the IEBC commissioner, who in the case of this, the Electoral Commission. So in the case of the elections, such a consensus did not happen going towards the elections. And that's why you see both sides of the political divide pulling out each other.
All right, a terrible situation, but thank you for your analysis, Nixon Kathembo. And we'll continue to follow developments in East Africa. Kenya, huge concerns after 3 fatalities confirmed today. This election violence happening on polling day. We've seen post-electoral violence in Kenya before, and hopefully things get better and these 2 very divided camps look at a way forward.